Greetings from the great state of Texas, and welcome everyone to my Word of the Week. Today I want to talk about no man can tame the tongue. James chapter 3 verses 7 and 8 says, "For every kind of beast and bird, of reptile and creature of the sea is tamed and has been tamed by mankind, but no man can tame the tongue. It is an unruly evil, full of deadly poison." Now verse 7 here is somewhat self-explanatory. James is saying that we tame every kind of beast and bird and reptile and things in the sea animals and things like that. We tame all those things. And the word tame here really has the ideal of gaining control over it, or at least restraining it. So we're able to do that with all kind of animals. But the tongue, though, he makes a very strong statement. The tongue no man can tame. Now when he said no man can tame the tongue, he's talking about within our own ability. But we do have the inherent ability. We can muster up the ability and techniques to train and tame wild animals, and we can do that. But we don't have the inherent ability within ourselves to tame our own tongue. So that's the idea when he said no man can tame the tongue. Now we can restrain it for a while. Even an unsaved person can restrain it for a while. But we're talking about a full restraint throughout the life and end of an individual. There's just no way a person can tame their own tongue. Why? Because it's an unruly evil. My friend, only the Holy Spirit can tame or control the tongue. No man can do it. Nobody can tame the tongue in their own power. But thank God that there is a power that is so much greater than us, and it's the power of the Holy Spirit. And the Holy Spirit can tame or control our tongue. And that's why sometimes people wonder and ask the question, why is speaking in other tongues the initial physical evidence of the baptism of the Holy Spirit? So why tongues? Well, I think it connects with what James said here. The tongue can no man tame, because it expresses what's in the heart. And so this is why speaking in different tongues is the initial physical evidence of the baptism of the Holy Spirit. Because when a person speaks with other tongues, you know what happens? The Holy Spirit is controlling our tongue. The one member that we cannot control, the Holy Spirit is controlling it. And that is the initial physical evidence of someone being baptized with the Holy Spirit. And let me say this. The baptism of the Holy Spirit is not all about speaking in tongues. And sometimes we can overemphasize tongues, but the baptism of the Holy Spirit is not all about tongues. It's about power. And it's all about the Holy Spirit controlling us. The Holy Spirit empowering us to do what He's called us to do, and to be the people He's called us to be. And my friend, that takes power, the power of God, for that to happen. So when we're baptized with the Holy Spirit, He tames the one thing we cannot tame, and that's the tongue. And that is the evidence that, wow, I've been baptized with the Holy Spirit, and I have received His power, and He's in control. Does that make sense to you? And again, that is the evidence that the Holy Spirit is in control. And that's only the beginning of a spirit-controlled life. Did you get that? That's only the beginning of a spirit-controlled life. Apostle Paul would say in Ephesians chapter 5 and verse 18, he said, "Be not drunk with wine, but be filled with the Holy Spirit." And that implies within it to allow the Holy Spirit to continually control you. And James said back in chapter 1, verse 26, when James said, "If anyone among you thinks he's religious," and that is speaking of an outward religiosity, that they just look real religious. But then he said, "and does not bridle his tongue, but he deceives his own heart. This one's religion is useless." And so James implies that the tongue can be controlled, but not by us. We can't do it. But God within us, Him working within us, that, my friend, He controls the tongue because He's controlling the heart. Did you get that? We can't do it, but God within us, Him working within us, that, my friend, controls the tongue because He's controlling the heart. It all goes back to the heart. If God can have control of our heart, then He can have control of our tongue. A bridled tongue is actually a fruit of the Spirit. Now that terminology is not used, a bridled tongue, in Galatians chapter 5 and 23, but the word temperance is used. And temperance literally speaks of spirit-controlled passions. And a lot of translations, they translate it as self-control, but it's really more of a spirit control. And the passions that all of us have, all the affections and desires and personalities, all of us, we have our own personalities. Excuse me. And temperance is a fruit of the Spirit in which those type of things are controlled. For example, we don't always have to get our 2 cents worth in. And we don't always have to get the last word in. Do you follow what I'm saying? And that's so important for us as believers, that we allow the Holy Spirit to bridle our tongue. Because the whole course of our life is directed by our words. In Colossians chapter 4, verse 6, Apostle Paul said, "Let your speech always be with grace, seasoned with salt, that you may know how to answer each one." And my friend, the grace of God, the sanctifying grace of God ought to be controlling our words. And in Psalms 19 and 14, David said, "Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, my strength and my Redeemer." That was his prayer. God, let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart. You see, they're connected there. So let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable. In other words, let them be pleasing. That's the ideal. Let them be pleasing to you, God. And my friend, that ought to be our prayer every day, because God knows the meditation of our heart. He knows it all. David said in Psalm 139, verses 1 through 4, "O Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know my sitting down and my rising up. You understand my thought afar off. You comprehend my path and my lying down, and are acquainted with my ways. For there is not a word on my tongue, but behold, O Lord, you know it altogether." So again, God knows it all. So James said the tongue no man can tame. It's an unruly evil. And that word unruly, it means unrestrainable, restless, like a wild animal, that basically can't be tamed. That's what our tongue is. It's unruly. It's unrestrainable. And notice James didn't just say unruly, but he said unruly evil. It's wicked. Then he said this, it's full of deadly poison. It means like the venom of a poisonous snake able to kill. That's what our tongue, our words can do. And he's talking about words, the words we use. You know, there's power in our words. There's power of life and death in our words. With our words, we can bless someone. We can encourage. We can be a help to encourage people with our words, or we can destroy them. Words can change the course of life in someone in a positive way or a negative way. Did you get that? Words can change the course of life in someone in a positive way or a negative way. And negative words can be like a poison. And when it gets into the bloodstream, it can kill you. That is how our words can be. Words that tear down, words that slander. They can get into our spiritual bloodstream in a sense and affect a person in a negative way. So we need to be very careful with our words. In the book of Song of Solomon, chapter 2, verse 15, Solomon would say, catcheth the foxes, the little foxes that spoil the vines. Have you ever heard that verse before? The little foxes that spoil the vine. You know, in our own lives, we can be a person that's honest and walks uprightly before the Lord, and none of us are perfect. We're all a work in progress. But you can be faithful and be a wonderful person, but at the same time allow your words that are inappropriately to slip out. But those little words are like little foxes that spoil the vines. It's like a fly in the ointment. And so we have to be very careful with our words. Words can change the course of life in someone in a positive way or a negative way. And I don't know about you, but I want my words to be a blessing to someone, to be encouraging to someone. And who knows, maybe that's all they need is a smile and a few encouraging words to get them through the day. Like what David said in Psalm 19 and 14, let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, my strength and my Redeemer. That was David's prayer, and that ought to be our prayer as well. And that concludes this message on No Man Can Tame the Tongue. God bless.